You see, life throws you some twists and turns, and then there are the hurricanes that completely turn you around. If someone had told me a decade ago that the person who would change me forever would be someone I'd put in handcuffs on myself, well, I would have laughed. I would have laughed a lot. Because that night, in the cold, noisy Interrogation Room 3, I met a man who said his name was Jesus, and I, Detective Miller, a man of routine, facts, and black coffee, was about to arrest God. And the craziest part? An hour later, he was the one who put me, the cop, up against the wall. What happened in that room wasn't just an arrest, it was a demolition. And my life was the building. To understand, you have to meet David Miller. Me. At the time all this happened, I was, let me think, 41 years, a middle-aged man in a uniform that already fit me like a second skin. My life was like a Swiss watch. I got up at 5:15 in the morning, checked the reports, had my coffee with a little milk. No, wait, no milk, just black. And by 6:30 I was out on the street. Economic situation. Normal. We lived in a house with a mortgage in a working-class neighborhood, with my wife Sarah, a kindergarten teacher, and my daughter Emily, who at that time was about to turn 18.10 years and dreamed of being a veterinarian. No luxuries, but we had what we needed. I was a practical, down-to-earth guy. Things were either black or white, legal or illegal. And that mentality had helped me survive 20 years in the department. It was a night at the end of November. I can remember the cold that got into my bones. The calendar showed a Wednesday, and everything was quiet, too quiet. I was at my desk, filling out tedious paperwork for a petty theft case. And just as I was about to sign, the radio crackled, that metallic, hurried voice from headquarters. Unit 50, report of a disturbance in Central Park, male suspect, approximately 30 years old, causing a disturbance of the peace. A simple riot. What could it be? A drunk, a guy yelling at pigeons. Routine. I grabbed my coat, greeted my partner, young Detective Chen, a brilliant 27-year-old, and we went out onto the street. I didn't feel anything. Zero intuition. Just tiredness. We arrived at Central Park, a place that at midnight becomes a shadow. The patrol car stopped near the frozen fountain. And yes, there were people. A small group of, I would say, 6 or 7 people. They were gathered together, but not shouting or fighting. They were listening. In the center of that semicircle was a man. I saw him at some 20 meters away under the yellowish light of a lantern. The suspect. And he didn't look like any troublemaker I'd ever seen before. He was a man of medium height, maybe about 33 years, with a beard and hair a little longer than usual. He wore simple but clean clothes. And despite the cold, he seemed to be wearing nothing more than a dark wool tunic, not a winter coat. His posture was incredibly calm. He wasn't gesticulating aggressively. In fact, his hands were open, palms up. And the detail that puzzled me, I was talking, but I wasn't shouting. His voice was soft, almost melodic, and the people around him, who appeared to be homeless or just late passers-by, were completely absorbed. They weren't riots, they were sermon improvised. I approached Mrs. Thompson, one of the listeners, an older woman I already knew because she used to walk her dog in the park. She owned a small antique boutique in town, but tonight she looked like a student listening to a professor. Mrs. Thompson, I told him in my officer's voice, "What's going on here?" She raised a finger for silence, looked at me with those tired gray eyes that now shone, and whispered, "Officer, listen. This man is speaking in a way that makes everything make sense." She told me that he had shown up maybe an hour ago and had started talking about peace, compassion, and how money isn't everything to me. He was just another preacher on a Wednesday night, but my job was to restore public order. I made my way through the small group, my uniform and utility belt making that familiar noise that usually makes people move aside. I stood in front of him. The crowd fell silent. The man stopped talking, turned around, and looked at me. And in that instant, my cop skepticism 41 years, he stumbled a little. His eyes, they weren't threatening, or challenging, or scared. They were patience, as if he had been waiting for me. "Mister," I told him in the most official voice I could, "you're disturbing the peace. You need to end this and disperse these people." The man bowed his head slightly. His voice was calm, resonating a little. "Official," said, "I'm just sharing a little hope with my brothers and sisters." "Is that a crime?" At that moment, Mrs. Thompson and another man approached, saying he wasn't doing anything wrong. But I'm a man of rules. Yes, it's a minor crime if the neighbors are calling. Come with me, sir. We'd better clear this up at the station. He sighed, not in frustration, but in resignation. Very well, officer. I'll do as you ask. He was docile, too docile. At that moment, I asked him his name, and what he told me gave me a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of November. My name is Jesus, he answered me with a slight smile. My jaw tightened. I put the handcuffs on him, and now the hurricane was heading straight for my life. We put him in the back of the patrol car. Young Chen was driving, and I was in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror. Jesus didn't say a word the whole way, but he wasn't silent from fear. He was observing. I felt his gaze on the back of my neck. And it wasn't a look of hatred or reproach. It was a look that seemed to know exactly what I had for dinner last night and where my knee hurt from that old bruise. Detective Miller, he said suddenly, his voice barely audible. Your daughter, Emily. Tell her to worry less about the math test. She'll do well. And don't scold her about the broken toy. My heart leaped. How the hell did he know my daughter's name? I hadn't said a word about my family. I yelled at Chen to be quiet, to not say another word. But Chen was as pale as I was. We knew this wasn't normal. We arrived at the police station and took him to Interrogation Room Number 3. A small room with a stainless steel table and 2 hard plastic chairs, no windows. A cold, emotionless place. I removed the handcuffs, closed the metal door, and the two of us were alone. I, the seasoned policeman from 41 years with a mortgage to pay. And he, the man who claimed to be Jesus, sat calmly with that all-knowing look in his eyes. My job was simple: interrogate him, fill out the paperwork for disturbing the peace, and send him to the holding cell. But it wasn't like that. As soon as I opened my mouth to start the routine questions, he leaned forward. And what he said next, it changed the rules of the game in such a brutal way that I still have trouble breathing when I remember it. There we were, in that cold, ugly room 3. I, Detective David Miller, from 41 years, in my starched uniform, ready to ask the routine questions. Full name, date of birth, do you have a criminal record? And he, this man named Jesus, who looked like he'd just stepped out of a play, with that calmness that made my nerves jump. I'd seen tough guys slump in that chair. I'd seen liars and con men sweat. But he was different. He leaned in, looked me in the eye, and didn't give me his name. He gave Memolife. Told me, David, I know you're worried about your March mortgage payments. Don't let it keep you up at night. And your wife Sarah's leg, the one that's been bothering her since her fall on the ice 5 years ago, needs a better cushion when she's at the table. I froze. My mouth went dry. The mortgage was a silent worry, something only Sarah and I discussed after Emily went to sleep. And Sarah's leg. The fall had been a small incident that wasn't on any police report or in any medical records at the station. It was a private ailment. Who are you? I managed to stammer out. My voice came out like a squeak. Jesus smiled, that gentle smile that wasn't quite mocking, but rather understanding. I also know that you still regret what happened to Michael. Boom. That's when it hit me. Michael. Michael was my partner, an incredible officer who had died in service a long time ago. 10 years. It was a shooting in a warehouse. I was there. Surveillance cameras had ruled that I did everything right, but in my head, there was a microsecond where I thought I could have covered it up better. It was the deepest scar on my 41 years as a police officer. Nobody knows. David, don't torture yourself for that moment. At that moment, I stopped seeing a suspect for disturbing the peace. I saw someone who was reading what apple. I took a breath. I had to regain control. I'm a detective, not a believer in ghosts or fortune-telling. Mira, I said, using my firmest police voice. I don't know how you got that information, but you have to stop. You have to tell me who you are, your true identity. Are you in mental distress? Why are you standing in a park at midnight telling people you're, well, you know? It was hard for me to say it. Jesus leaned back in the plastic chair, which creaked under his weight. My identity in your world isn't important, David. But if I must register a name for your files, Use the one I gave you. And as for the park," he stopped, his eyes looking beyond the living room wall as if seeing the night sky. "People are very lonely, David. They're hungry. Not for food, although they're hungry for that too, but for a purpose." A young woman of 22, had decided that that night was going to be her last night on that park bench. I just reminded her of the value of her breath. My police instinct returned, loud and strong. A woman who was going to. I took out my notebook and wrote hastily, "Can you identify that woman? I had to check it out. If this guy was making up stories to avoid a lesser charge, I was going to catch him." "Her name is Clara. Clara Jenkins told me. He lives on South Street, near the dry cleaners. Tell him to get up early tomorrow and check his email inbox. He'll get an offer he's been waiting for a long time." The details were too specific. A lamplighter wouldn't speak with such certainty about a stranger's life. At that moment, the door opened. It was Chen, my partner. "Boss, I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. Your wife called. She says Emily can't sleep, she's really nervous about tomorrow's math test, and she won't stop crying. She wants to know if you can call her." It was exactly what Jesus had said in the car, less than half an hour before. My daughter, Emily, from 10 years, crying over an exam. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I turned around to leave and take the call, but Jesus' voice stopped me. "David," he said, with an authority that did not correspond to him, given his situation, "don't call her from here. The ringing of the station phone will remind her that you're away, doing your job, and will make her feel even lonelier. Go yourself. It'll only take 10 minutes. A hug from her 41-year-old father is much more powerful than any sleeping pill." My mind was short-circuiting. My job required me to remain in that room with the suspect until the interrogation and search were complete. Breaking protocol to go home, even 14 minutes, it was unthinkable. But my heart, that father's heart that work always tried to harden, screamed at me. I looked at Jesus. He just gave me a nodding look. Chen was nervous, staring at the ceiling, knowing we were witnessing something that broke all the rules of the universe. "Chen," I said, and my voice was strangely calm. "Stay here. Don't take off the handcuffs. Don't talk to him, and don't let him out. I'll be back in a bit." I placed my service pistol and badge on the desk, a sign of respect for the trust one was giving Chen. I stepped out into the cold night. November. I drove home at full speed. The trip that normally took me 15 minutes, I did it in 8, and as my foot pressed on the accelerator, a question pierced my mind. What kind of criminal tells me to go hug my daughter? I was the cop, and he, the arrested man, had just given me a moral order that I had to follow. I walked through the door. I saw my wife, Sarah, her eyes brimming with tears of frustration, and Emily, curled up on the couch. I went straight to my daughter. I hugged her tight. I told her she was the smartest girl in the world and that one test didn't define who she was. I was left alone 0.7 minutes, and in that hug, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I ran back to the station, feeling like a teenager coming home late. I was terrified of what Chen would say, or worse, what I'd find. I parked, went inside, and ran toward Ward 3. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I pushed open the door and stopped dead in my tracks. Chen was there, but Jesus wasn't. I pushed the door and there it was. Room 3. Empty. Only young Chen, my roommate, remained, 27 years, who was standing in the middle of the room, pale as a sheet. He had taken off his cap and was running his hand through his dark, curly hair, his eyes wide open. "Where is?" My voice came out with a roar, the kind of roar a superior uses when protocol has been violated in the most spectacular way possible. Chen cringed. "Boss, I swear I don't know. I was right here, like you told me." I stood by the door. I didn't talk to him, I didn't take off the handcuffs, though I don't even know where you put them. He looked at me in despair. I was sitting in the chair, calm. And suddenly, I don't know how to explain it, I felt a strange warmth in the room. And the air smelled of the countryside, of wet earth, not of bleach and stale coffee. I turned around for a second, just to look at the clock on the wall. And this is where Chen's story gets really strange. the part that made me doubt my own judgment. And when I looked again, the chair was empty. It was just gone. I didn't believe him. I couldn't believe him. A guy doesn't just vanish from a locked room in a police station. I went in and checked every inch of that small room. The metal table, the chairs, the door, which I'd locked. I checked the ceiling, I checked under the table. There were no windows. There were no vents big enough for a squirrel to escape, let alone a man about 10 inches tall to 33 years. I had registered the police station entry log myself just before 15 minutes. He was lost. A suspected public nuisance had vanished. And then I saw it. In the center of the stainless steel table, right where Jesus had been sitting, was something. It wasn't a note. It wasn't a gun. It was a small, irregularly shaped, carved object, no bigger than my thumb. I picked it up. It was shallow coarse, pale pink salt crystal, carved into a shape that resembled a teardrop. I didn't understand why. A gift. A trace. I was a police officer 4 decades, and the only thing I knew about salt at a crime scene was that people used it for cooking or superstitions. I stuffed the crystal into an evidence bag, even though I had no idea what it would be used for. I had to protect myself and protect Chen. If this report got out, we'd be the laughingstock of the entire department and probably lose our jobs. Especially me, who had broken protocol by going home to see Emily 10 years. Chen, I said, looking at him with an intensity that left him no doubt. Look, this man was mentally unstable, you understand? Chances are he broke loose, slipped out the door just as I was coming back, and fled down the street before I saw him. Chen looked at me. He knew I was lying. I knew it. But he nodded. Yes, boss. He left just as you were returning. Mentally unstable. It was a poor story, but it was the only one we had. We spent the rest of the night combing the neighborhood, on foot and in the patrol car. We looked for a middle-aged man with a beard, dressed in a woolen robe. Of course, we found nothing. It's midnight in a city with millions of people. How do you find someone who doesn't want to be found and who, on top of that, may have been hallucinating? Mrs. Thompson, the antiques lady, and the other witnesses in the park had only said that he left. He just got up and left when the police took him away, they had said, not knowing that the police had left him in an interrogation room. I returned to my desk the next morning around 7:30 in the morning, with a bitter taste of the lie in my mouth and exhaustion in my bones. The arrest report was still open. No fingerprints, he had wiped his hands before I put the handcuffs on him. I remember now that strange gesture. No address, just a name. Jesus. The only evidence was that pink salt crystal in a sealed bag. I needed some closure. I decided to file the case as missing suspect. Possible serious mental disorder. And just as I was about to close the file, my phone rang. It was reception. Detective Miller, you have a call on line 1. It's a Clara Jenkins. She says you can confirm something for her. Clara Jenkins. The young woman from 22 years old that, according to Jesus, he was going to take his life in the park and that he had to check his mail. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding again. Clara Jenkins? I asked. Her voice was shaky, but cheerful. Yes, it's me. Look, I don't know how you knew, but last night I was bad, really bad. A man in the park told me to check my email this morning. And I did. It's the scholarship. The West Coast University Photography Scholarship. I got it. After 7 months of waiting, it came at 6:15 in the morning. You saved my life. There was a pause. Do you know who that man was, officer? The one in the park? It was as if he knew. I didn't let her finish. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. The precision of the information was chilling. It wasn't a vague prediction, it was a specific detail, the photography scholarship, with a life-or-death outcome for a person I'd never met. A man who claimed to be Jesus, who had vanished without a trace from a locked interrogation room, and before doing so, had given me intimate details of my life, the exact location of a desperate young woman, and a piece of fatherly advice that saved my daughter's night. 10 years. It wasn't a case of disturbing the peace, or a mentally disturbed suspect anymore. This was something else. And the salt crystal in my evidence bag was my only anchor to a reality that was disintegrating. I had to know the truth. Was he a fraud, a madman, or something bigger than my police badge allowed me to believe? And my next step was to find a man no one but me knew existed. I closed the file of Jesus at 8:30 in the morning. I filed it under Open Case, Suspect on the Run. I filed it. I covered it up with layers of police bureaucracy. I was Detective David Miller, off 41 years, doing his job. But in my head, he was a man who was covering up the strangest thing that had ever happened to him in 20 years son duty. And I did it because if I told the truth, if I said that the guy claiming to be the Son of God had vanished from a locked room after reading my mind and saving a young woman, they'd have me in a straitjacket before I could blink. That afternoon, when I arrived home, my wife, Sarah, the kindergarten teacher, greeted me at the door. Her face was relaxed, something I hadn't seen in weeks, due to our concern for Emily and the money. "Dear," he told me, hugging me, "thanks for last night. Emily slept like a log after your hug. And look," he showed me his leg, the one that had been bothering him since the fall a while ago, 0.5 years. "I bought a new cushion during my lunch break. It's amazing, David. It's gray, perfect for the sofa." She didn't notice my reaction. But I did. The gray cushion. The specification was perfect. Jesus, the man I arrested, not only knew her leg hurt, but he knew she needed a cushion. The chain of coincidences was already too heavy to be called a coincidence. I returned to work the night shift. I couldn't concentrate. The station was quiet, just the buzzing of computers. I sat down at my desk and took the evidence bag out of my drawer. The pink salt crystal, I took it out. It wasn't heavy, but I felt the weight of responsibility. What was this crystal? A clue. A relic. It was the only thing I had left from that encounter. I turned it over in the light from my desk lamp. It seemed to radiate a soft, strange warmth. I was a man of facts. And my main fact now was that a man who predicted my intimate life and the life of a stranger, who mysteriously disappeared, was on the loose. And he had left me a clue. My life off our decades, built on logic, law, and order, was failing me. If what Clara Jenkins and my family said was true, then their predicament in the park wasn't crazy. It was the truth. I had to find him. Not to arrest him, but to understand. I made the decision. I was going to use my police resources, but off the record. At 10 o'clock at night, I went to the evidence room. I opened Michael's file, my long-dead partner. 10 years, I pulled out the photos of the scene, the ones only I'd seen. The guilt of not covering it up had eaten away at me for a decade. I needed to know how Jesus, that man, knew about every microsecond of my doubt. Then, at midnight, I took the patrol car, the one from Unit 6, so that it wouldn't be traced to the one on my shift, and drove to the Calle South. I went to the address Jesus had mentioned. The house of Clara Jenkins. A small terraced house. The lights were on, and through the window I saw a young woman, the one with 22 years old, in front of a laptop, laughing. She was wearing a blue turtleneck. I didn't knock. I was a police officer, and I didn't want to scare her or involve her further in my madness. I just wanted to check. She was alive. She was happy. And her joy was courtesy of an escaped suspect. I realized I couldn't do this alone. Chen, from 27 years, I was too scared, and it was too new. I needed someone who knew me, someone outside the station. I thought of Dr. Elias Vance. Elias was my friend from college, a professor of sociology and comparative religion, a man with an open mind and an encyclopedic knowledge of the unexplainable. Elias was my grounding wire. At 2 in the morning, I called him. Elias lived a 3 time zones away, but I knew he would answer. "David, it's 5 in the morning here. Is everything okay?" His voice sounded deep and sleepy. "Elias," I told him, my voice low and urgent, "I need your help. Something absurd happened to me. I arrested a man who claimed to be Jesus. And not only did he vanish from the room, but he told me things no one could possibly know." I told him the story: Emily, Sarah, Michael, Clara Jenkins, and the salt crystal. I remained silent. There was a very long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of his breathing. Then Elias coughed and said, "David, you've been working too hard. You're stressed. You must be hallucinating." I expected that. "No," Elias. I have evidence. I have a crystal he left behind. And I have the file. Come to town. I'll give you the crystal, and you tell me what the hell it is. I beg you. I sent him a blurry photo of the salt crystal. Elias, my academic friend, who had dealt with ancient texts all his life, looked at the photo. Others passed by 5 minutes of silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice more alive now. David, I don't know what that is. But it looks like something I've seen in Middle Eastern texts from over 2,000 years ago. It's a marker of purity. Or a test. He told me he'd take the first available flight and arrive in the city at noon the next day. We agreed to meet at a cafe that didn't have surveillance cameras near the university. I'd crossed the line. I'd involved a civilian in an unofficial investigation, and now I was about to hand him evidence from a police station. I was risking my badge point 20 years, my mortgage, everything. But the need for the truth was a fire that consumed me. I arrived at the police station, even in the morning. I felt like an actor in a play, playing the role of Detective Miller, a man of routine, when in reality my head was in turmoil. I drank my coffee black, ignored Chen, and 27 years, who looked at me with the eyes of a slaughtered lamb, and I waited. I knew I had to handle the pressure, or this would consume me before noon arrived, the time of my meeting with Elias. At 10:20 in the morning, the call I wasn't expecting. It was from Michael's widow, Suzanne. We hadn't talked much. She had moved out of town a while ago, 8 years, but he still called me every year around the holidays. His voice was cracking. David, I need to see you. He told me he would come to town that very afternoon. He had found something in an old box belonging to Michael, my long-dead partner, 10 years, something I didn't understand and felt I had to share with myself. I felt a knot in my stomach. Was this another coincidence? Or had the encounter with Jesus opened a floodgate containing all my secrets and guilt? At 12:10 in the afternoon, I met Elias in an old cafe, in a dark corner away from everything. Elias Vance. My friend, a man of about 45 years, with thick glasses and a scruffy beard, who looked more like a Greek philosopher than an academic. He sat there in front of me, carrying a worn leather briefcase. I handed him the evidence bag with the pink salt crystal. Elias took a magnifying glass out of his briefcase. He studied the glass, turning it around in the cafeteria's fluorescent lighting. It smelled of earth and sea. David, he told me, his voice a deep whisper. This isn't table salt. It's Himalayan salt, but it's been treated with extreme heat. In ancient Middle Eastern traditions, over 2,000 years ago, this type of crystal was used for two things: as a purifier and as a symbol of a covenant. Often, it was given to someone who had been tested or chosen for a task. Elias continued, excited like a child with a new toy. Look at the carving, David. This shape, this tear. It's no coincidence. It represents the need to see the truth through the tears of illusion. Salt is the only mineral that man has kept since the beginning of time to preserve the flesh. The idea is, preserve this truth, David. Don't let it rot in your police files. He looked at me. This man, Jesus, left you a coded message for your soul, not your apartment. If he is real, Elias, I asked him, feeling ridiculous saying this out loud. What are you doing in this city? Why do you let yourself be arrested by a mere 41-year-old police officer? Elias sighed, closed the lid of his briefcase, and put the crystal away. If we accept the premise that he is, that Jesus, then, isn't here for a massive sermon. He's here for individuals. To shake up people who are stuck in their routines. Like you, David. You're a man of rules who needs his rules broken so you can see the whole picture. He advised me to look for a less obvious trail. Look for the people he touched, not the people he preached. At 4 in the afternoon, I met with Suzanne, Michael's widow, at the police station cafe. She had aged, but her eyes still held the same pain as before. 10 years, she took an old, dusty notebook out of her bag. Michael always wrote in this, he said, his voice soft. But he kept it. I just found it at the bottom of a box. There's something here I don't understand, David. I picked up the small spiral notebook. Michael's handwriting was bold and messy. I found the page from the night of his death. The date, 10 years back. And just below his last routine entry, There was a sentence crossed out and then rewritten with an urgency that made me shiver. I can't believe David hesitated. I know he covered for me. I was the idiot. My fault. And below that, a little note that made my blood run cold. I need to talk to David about the doubt, but I can't. Time's up. Michael, my partner, the man for whom I had carried a silent guilt for a decade, he didn't blame me. He knew. He knew I'd hesitated for a microsecond, but he knew I'd recovered and tried to cover it up. And he, at the time of her death, had taken full blame to protect me from the internal investigation. Jesus, in Courtroom 3, wasn't accusing me of Michael's death. He was letting me off the hook. Secret off Michael. Tears pricked my eyes. My life, my guilt, my work, everything connected to that bearded man who disappeared. Jesus' revelations weren't meant to torment me, they were meant to prepare me. He had freed me from Michael's guilt so I could face my next step with a clean soul. He had told me to go see Emmy Lito, remind me what was important. I had revealed myself to Clara Jenkinstow, show me the power of a word. Andy had freed myself from the weight of my dead friend. He was no longer Detective Miller looking for a fugitive. He was David Miller, a man offered 1 years with a mission. And my first step, using Elias's logic, was to find the most unlikely person I'd ever touched. Elias's words echoed in my head, look for the people he touched, not the people he preached. And Michael's diary had given me the freedom to act. With 41 years and a decade of guilt erased, my vision was clear. I had to get back to Central Park, the frozen garden where it all began, where the fountain was covered in frost that cold night of November. The idea was simple. If Jesus had not only spoken, but had physically interacted with someone, that person would be my next lead. I returned to the park at 9 o'clock at night, at the same time we had arrested him. The park was now a shadow. He was wearing civilian clothes, an old jacket and a hat. I didn't want to alert anyone, especially the security guards or the usual vagrants. I passed off the hours talking to the people who usually spend their nights there. I bought them hot coffee and asked them about the bearded preacher. Most of them told me the same thing. He spoke of peace and left with the police. But one man, a big, silent fellow named George, about 50 years, who lived under a nearby bridge and had the hard look of the street, gave me a crucial detail. The one who was speaking, he told me, while sipping the coffee with trembling hands. He gave me something. He said I needed substance to feed my body and soul. My heart skipped a beat. What did he give you, George? Money. Food. George shook his head and pulled out his right hand. He showed it to me. His hand was open, and on the inside of his wrist, near the thumb, there was a mark. It wasn't a wound or an old scar. It was a brown spot, perfectly circular, the size of a coin. And just below the mark, the skin was unusually soft, almost like a baby's. It was my turn here, he said, pointing at the mark. And he handed me a piece of bread. Warm. It felt like he'd taken it out of his pocket. I stopped. Warm bread. In the cold of November in a park. I asked George if it hurt. No, told me. It felt like a ray of sunshine. A deep warmth. And the mark appeared immediately. It doesn't hurt. In fact, my arthritis, which has bothered me for 15 years, hasn't bothered me since he touched me. I rolled up my jacket sleeve to hide the chill that ran down my arm. The people he touched didn't just receive words, they received healing or a physical revelation. My next step was clear: find that baker. I passed the following 48 hours searching the city archives. Bread wasn't an easy lead. What kind of bread? Where did it come from? I visited all the artisan bakeries within a radius of 5 miles from the park. I asked subtle questions. Did you sell bread to a man with a prominent beard and woolen clothes, not long ago, in the middle of the night? They looked at me strangely, of course. I was a police officer, 4 decades asking for bread. Finally, I found it in a small establishment called the Golden Crumb, a place that had been there since the years 1960. The owner was a short, robust woman, with her hands always covered in flour, about 55 years. I sat down at the bar and ordered a coffee. I showed him a blurry photo I had taken from the archive, the only photo of Jesusoft Park surveillance. She wiped the bar with her rag, sighed, and looked at me. Yeah, said. I remember. He came here about 3 days ago, I think, just before dark. He didn't buy any bread. He came in and stood over the oven, the brick one, the one my father built. He asked me if he could put one of his hands in the dough. Just once. He was very polite. I asked him if he had taken the dough. No, said. He said the dough had already received his blessing. He paid with an old bill, one that smelled of earth and lavender. And then he left. The baker took me to see the oven. It was a brick monster. The dough Jesus had touched. I asked her what had happened to that bread. Everything was sold, told me. But the strangest thing, detective, is that the oven has been hotter than ever. Since he put his hand in the dough, we can bake bread in half the time. My gas bill is down 50% this week. It's like a miracle. We call it the prophet's oven. The warmth in George's hand. The warm bread. The blessing on the dough. The Himalayan salt crystal. I realized Jesus wasn't just wandering. He was leaving traces of everyday miracles. My arrest and disappearance were just a small part of a much larger mission. He'd used my police station as a contact point to leave a trail that only a skeptic like me could follow. And with the help of Elias and the baker, I now had a map. But a map of where he was now was as important as a map of what I was going to see later. And Jesus' next encounter was going to leave me with the most shocking physical evidence yet. With my mind focused on the traces of everyday miracles, as Elias called them, knew I had to find someone to whom Jesus had done something truly inexplicable. The healing of George's arthritis was one solid lead. The efficiency of the prophet's oven was another. But I needed physical tests, something that couldn't be denied with the excuse of a mental disorder. And the most unlikely place to find a miracle occurred to me, a pharmacy. My logic was this: if Jesus was touching people to heal them, the people he was going to heal were probably suffering, and people who are suffering are usually on the client lists of places that sell relief. I spent the morning at my desk, pretending to work, while I reviewed files on misdemeanors committed near the Central Park in 48-hour post-arrest. Nothing. Then, I looked for reports of accidents or emergencies involving sudden injuries or illnesses. I found a small incident report filed by one of the large pharmacy chains to which 8 o'clock at night the day after my arrest. The report said, "Commotion in the painkiller section. Client is experiencing severe pain. An ambulance is called." Routine. But the time and place fit perfectly with my timeline. The pharmacy was just 10 blocks from the park. I put on my uniform and badge. I no longer cared whether my investigation was official or not. This was personal. I went to the pharmacy, spoke to the manager. A young, skittish man, about 30 years. I told him I was investigating a robbery that had supposedly occurred near the painkiller section the night before. A complete police fabrication. I asked for the CCTV footage. We sat in the manager's small office, a telephone in the morning. The video started. At 19:58 hours. The image was grainy, but clear. The painkiller aisle was visible. And there, in a wheelchair, was a man about 50 years, his face twisted in pain. His name was Robert. He had been in a motorcycle accident a few years ago, 15 years, which had left him with chronic nerve damage and limited mobility in his legs. His financial situation was precarious. He lived on a disability pension and struggled to pay his rent. As Robert struggled to reach a bottle of pills, something else appeared at the edge of the shot. It was him. Jesus, the same dark woolen robe, the same beard, the same calm, easygoing gait. The manager gasped. "That's the guy, detective. The one who caused the disturbance. The one who wasn't buying anything." On the screen, Jesus approached Robert, the man in the wheelchair. Robert looked irritated, trying to push him. Jesus bent down. And then, he did something simple, something that happened in less than 5 seconds. He put his hands on Robert's legs. Robert screamed. A loud scream, filled with surprise and pain. People turned around. The pharmacy manager ran into the aisle. We saw him run in the video. And then, we saw it. Robert stopped screaming. He took a deep breath. Then, the camera captured the most inexplicable moment that I, Detective Miller, 41 years, I had ever seen in my life. Robert stood up. He got up from his wheelchair. The manager, who was standing a few feet away, stopped dead in his tracks. Robert moved cautiously, his hands gripping the pill rack. Then he let go. He took a step. Then another. I was walking. Robert's face in the video was a mixture of ecstasy and confusion. Jesus didn't stick around for the commotion. The moment Robert took his first step, Jesus simply turned and walked away. He didn't run. He simply walked, out of frame, toward the cosmetics section. I asked the manager to rewind. And there, at the exact moment Jesus walked out of frame, a flash of blurred light appeared, and the image stabilized. It disappeared from the camera's field of vision as quickly as he had disappeared from room 3 of my police station. The manager was trembling. "Did you see that, detective? What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I was staring at the image of Robert, the now cured man, hugging the frightened pharmacy manager. I had the proof. A high-definition video of a miracle in an aisle of a big city pharmacy. The man I arrested, who freed my soul from Michael's guilt, had cured a paralysis of 15 years with a single touch. I felt dizzy. My world of facts and rules off our decades. I couldn't contain this. I took the video unit, lied to the manager, telling him it was evidence of a burglary, and walked out. I had the proof. But now, I had to find Robert, the healed man, to understand the message Jesus had left with him. With the CCTV tape from the pharmacy hidden in my locker, a police officer 41 years with evidence of a miracle, my next goal was Robert, the man who had walked. Robert, about 50 years, which had happened 15 years in a wheelchair. I found it through the records of the ambulance they called when they saw him collapse, not from pain, but from pure astonishment. His address was a social housing complex, a gray and depressed place, about 20 blocks from my house. I went to his apartment at 3 in the afternoon. The door was open. I entered cautiously, my hand near my gun. The apartment was spotless, but empty. There was a note taped to the refrigerator. "I don't need this anymore." The note was on a government form for disability benefits. In the middle of the room, her wheelchair, her partner's 15 years, was overturned, like an abandoned ship. Robert was gone. He hadn't run away. He had gone to a new life that Jesus had given him. Outside, I found her neighbor, an elderly woman of about 60 years, sitting in the hallway, knitting. Her name was Martha. I approached her gently, showing her my badge. I asked her about Robert. "He left this morning," she told me, without stopping knitting. "He walked away. He said he was going to walk to the sea." I stopped. The sea was at more than 100 miles away. I asked Martha if she'd seen Robert after his miracle the night before. She looked at me with those old, tired eyes. "Yeah," said. "He came back here, walking, at 9 o'clock at night. He was beaming. He was shouting that he was healed. Everyone in the compound saw him walk. It was wonderful, detective. Wonderful." He paused, his voice darkening. But it didn't last long. I asked her to tell me what had happened. Martha told me that around midnight, Robert had come into her apartment and sat down on the couch. I wasn't happy, detective. I was sad, desperate, even. Robert had told her she could walk, that her legs were perfect. But the healing hadn't filled the empty that I had. "The Lord gave me my legs," had told Martha. "But He didn't give me a job. He didn't give me a wife. He didn't give me a reason to use them." The touch of Jesus had healed Robert's body, 50 years, but had exposed the misery of his soul. Disability had been his identity during years. It had been his excuse for not trying, for not risking failure. Now, he no longer had that excuse. He was physically free, but terrified of his new freedom. He said his wheelchair at least gave him a place to sit and wait for death. Now, he said, he has torn death. The cure had been, in a way, a condemnation. I sat in the aisle next to Martha. It was a cruel twist. I, David Miller, had been released from 18 years of guilt without even asking, and Robert had been released from a 15-year paralysis, and now he felt more trapped than ever. It was as if Jesus' touch wasn't a magic bullet, but a brutal mirror of life itself. I asked Martha if there was any other trail Robert had mentioned, anything other than the sea. She looked thoughtful, her needle stopping. "Yeah," he said finally. "He mentioned his brother. A younger brother he hasn't seen for many years. He told me that the man who healed him had told him that his brother was waiting for him. And Thave, he was sicker than Robert had ever been." Robert, the newly healed man, had begun his first hike off 15 years to go take care of someone else. The message was clear. Jesus didn't just heal, drove. It prompted the healed to action. Robert, from 50 years with his newly restored legs, he had to use them immediately for a greater purpose, caring for a relative, his brother. His physical healing was just the entry ticket to a spiritual task. I felt the pressure. I, too, had been healed, freed from my guilt by Michael. What was my task? My job was to find this man, Jesus, to understand my own liberation and that of others. But like Robert, I too felt a pang. I had spent so much time as a police officer, dealing with humanity's evil, that I had forgotten what life looked like, pure goodness. And now that I had it on security tape, I felt unworthy. I was a man of lies, the arrest lie, the CCTV lie, chasing a real man. My path led me to Robert's brother, the next point of contact. And what I would find, there would be a wound that wasn't physical, but one that had been festering in the city for almost a decade. Robert's brother. That was all he had. The man who, according to Jesus, was sicker than someone who had passed by 15 years paralyzed. I looked in Robert's police files. A man of 50 years with a detailed medical history. His only family was a younger brother, Simon, of about 45 years, who lived across town. The trail ran cold there. Robert and Simon hadn't spoken to each other for a while. 8 years, after a fight over money and the death of his parents. Simon lived in a small house in an industrial area, a place where the sun seemed to struggle to shine. I went there at 10 in the morning the next day, hoping that Robert, with his newly healed legs, hadn't arrived yet. Simon's house was gloomy. The windows were covered with newspaper. I knocked on the door. No one answered. I knocked again, louder, holding my badge. Finally, the door opened a crack. Simon. He was the antithesis of his brother, Robert. He was gaunt, with thinning hair and a badly shaved beard. His eyes were sunken. He leaned on a cane. His financial situation was worse than Robert's. He lived in a spiral of debt and isolation. He wasn't physically ill, at least not like Robert. But he looked inside. Police. What do you want? His voice was harsh, full of distrust. I asked him about Robert. Simon looked at me with such bitterness I could almost taste it. Robert. The cripple, right? I don't want anything to do with that selfish man. I haven't seen him for 8 years. I told him what had happened. That Robert had been cured and that I was coming to get him. The news that his brother, the cripple, was walking didn't make him happy. It made him furious. Cured? Now what? Are you here to lecture me about my life? His illness was not physical, it was an illness of the alma, anger, resentment, and isolation. I tried to get back to the subject of Jesus. I asked him if he'd noticed anything strange, any visitors. He shook his head, irritated. Just my misery, officer. My own dear misery. And at that moment I saw it. On the wall, just above the kitchen table, was a calendar. And on the date from 8 years, a red circle and a note, the day everything died. No forgiveness. I asked about the note. Simon shrugged. Nonsense. Leave me alone. But I insisted. Simon, I know you're hurting. Something happened 8 years ago. What is it? His facade shattered. He collapsed into a chair, clutching his head. My daughter. My little daughter, Lily. She was 6. She died. In a car accident. Robert and I were fighting over our parents' will, and because of distraction, my wife lost control of the car. She died. And my wife. She left me a month later. All because of that stupid fight. My fault. And Robert blamed me. There it was. The real disease. Not paralysis, not arthritis. It was theblamined forgiveness of 8 years what was killing Simon. It was the deep resentment that had frozen his life and his soul. That was why Jesus had said he was sicker than Robert. Robert's body was broken, but his spirit was simple. Simon's body was functional, but his spirit was a battlefield. Simon wiped away his tears. I pray every night for it all to end. I got up to leave, feeling the helplessness of a policeman in the face of human suffering. And just before leaving, my eyes fell on his nightstand. There was a single object, a small piece of olive wood, simply carved, very smooth to the touch. I asked him what it was. Simon took it, and his face softened for the first time. It appeared last night, on my doormat, with a note. It said, "Open the door to your brother's love. He is walking toward you." I don't know who left it, but the wood is warm. Warm. A touch of warmth, like the one George felt on his wrist. A physical object of comfort. Jesus had been there, or left a sign, just before Robert arrived. He had freed Robert to heal his brother's wound. He had forced Robert to give Apropacito his healing. And to Simon, he had given Theopito welcome his brother back and, more importantly, to begin forgiving. Robert's physical healing was just the key to unlocking Simon's forgiveness. I left Simon's house and returned to my patrol car. My heart was beating with the speed of discovery. I realized that Jesus wasn't running from the police. He was carrying out an intimate rescue mission, touching people's lives, not to make a spectacle, but to move emotional pieces that were stuck in guilt, resentment, and pain. 8 or 10 or 15 years. And my arrest in the park had been just the first piece of this incredibly complex plan. I wasn't chasing Jesus. I was following the healing stellathat he left in his wake. And what was the next step in the plan? What great pain or what great secret was about to be exposed? My police mind, David Miller's 41 years, I resisted. Jesus' miracles, Robert's healing, Simon's deliverance, Clara's scholarship, were acts of kindness directed toward strangers, people he'd encountered on the street. But his final act, the release of my own guilt over Michael's death, had involved me personally. And if the pattern held, his next touch had to be even closer. It had to be someone in my everyday life. Someone I saw every day. I spent the morning at the police station like a ghost. I watched everyone. The captain, a grumpy, overworked man, 50-something years old. The detectives, the street officers. And, of course, Chen, my young partner in crime, 27 years, who still seemed terrified by Jesus' disappearance from room 3. But there seemed to be no hidden pain in them, no wound often year superando. And then it hit me. I'd been looking for a stranger. But who was the person who had been in room 3 with Jesus, the person who had witnessed everything, other than me? The young detective Chen. I dismissed him as too new and inexperienced. But Jesus's pattern was to look for weakness and guilt. And Chen wasn't as simple as he seemed. At lunchtime, I used my detective access to discreetly review Chen's personnel file. I wanted to know if he had any recent trauma, any great loss. I found the file, and there was nothing recent. But at the end of his chart, in his training reports, something caught my eye. Chen had graduated from the academy about 2 years ago. 3 year sat number 1 in his class. But there had been a note about a previous incident that had not been made public. The report detailed an incident from 8 years, before Chen joined the force. His father, a businessman of about 60 years, had been falsely accused of embezzlement. The stress of the investigation had led him to collapse. Although the accusations turned out to be false, the damage had been done. He had lost his business and his reputation. Chen's family had sunk into shame and depression. And in the note, there was a crucial detail. Chen's father had developed a gambling addiction to cope with stress and addiction. Chen had been desperately hiding, covering his father's debts with his meager police salary, 27 years. There it was. The pain closest to me. Chen, the young man with a bright future, was paying the price for shame and an addiction. 8 years, a financial and emotional pain that was consuming him. Jesus hadn't come to heal a body, but to save a family from a slow, destructive disease. The man of peace had exposed my guilt. Now he would expose Chen's secret. I knew where to find Chen. Every evening, at 5:30, Chen went to a nearby gym, not to lift weights, but to visit his father, who worked there part-time as a janitor to pay off his debts. I went to the gym. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I sat on the bleachers, pretending to wait for someone. I saw Chen come in. He looked tired, with the same paleness he had had when Jesus disappeared. He went straight to the supply room. His father, Mr. Chen, about 60 years, was sweeping. I saw him, a man with the posture of someone who's lost hope. Chen took an envelope from his pocket, his paycheck. And before he could give it to his father, a man with a beard and a dark wool robe stepped out from behind a pile of clean towels. Jesus. I froze in my seat. Jesus was there. Simon and Robert had given me the lead, and here he was. Chen and his father stared at him, surprised. Jesus walked over, placed one gentle hand on Chen's father's shoulder and the other on Chen's hand holding the envelope. "There is another way to pay the debts, son," said Jesus, his voice soft but clear. "Not with the money of your future, but with the truth." Then he looked at the father. "Shame has already taken enough. Truth is the only real payment." I saw Chen fall to his knees, the envelope falling to the floor. His father, his face streaming with tears, dropped the broom and hugged his son. It was the first time they had hugged in a long time. And when I got up from the steps and ran to the supply room, less than 30 meters away, it was already too late. The father and son were there, crying. Jesus was gone. It left his final mark on my partner, forcing the truth, pushing for healing through honesty. My mission had reached its most intimate point. My partner had been touched. Jesus' revelations had been a torrent. Michael, Clara, Robert, Simon, Chen. In each case, he had freed a person from a burden of years. And the key to each release was the true. Now, the truth of my own sin was drowning me. I, Detective Miller, 41 years, I had lied. I had lied about the arrest, about the disappearance, about the pharmacy video. I had compromised my partner, Chen, to cover up the inexplicable reality. And there was one person who knew the truth of my lie, the person who had covered for me. That night, when I got home, my wife, Sarah, the kindergarten teacher, was waiting for me in the kitchen. The apartment smelled of apple pie, and the warmth of the home was a harsh contrast to the cold in my soul. "David," he told me, his voice calm, too calm. "The captain called." I felt a chill. What did he want? She sat at the table, looking into my eyes. "I wanted to confirm that you were on full shift the other night. Wednesday, when that guy escaped from Ward 3. I had used my family as an alibi with Chen, and now I had to use that same lie with the department. I told the captain you were home, Sarah. That Emily's doctor called and you had to come back." I looked at my hands, avoiding her gaze. She was my silent accomplice. She had confirmed my lie, risking her own reputation. She, who was the most honest person I knew. Sarah stood up. She approached me, her gray eyes filled with something that wasn't anger, but deep sadness. "David, I'm not asking you what you said to the captain." Her voice was firm, like a mother scolding her child. "I'm asking you why you don't dare look me in the face. You asked me to lie for you. You asked me to say you were here at 11:30 at night, when in fact you didn't arrive until much later. And I did. I sat down, exhausted, in a chair. I had to do it. It was a sensitive case. I can't explain it." She interrupted me. "I don't care what you did, David. I care what he's doing. With you, when you came back from the police station that night, you were different. You were calmer. More you. And when you hugged 10-year-old Emily, it was the most real hug you'd given her in 6 months. I lied for you because I love you, and because that night, you brought a little of that peace into this house." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But you can't build peace on a lie." My heart shattered. Sarah had felt Jesus's effect through me, without knowing it. It was the unconditional love Jesus wanted me to feel and give. I told her the truth. I told her everything. Jesus' name, the prediction about Emily, the mortgage, the salt crystal, Robert's healing I saw in the video. When I mentioned the salt crystal, she froze. Sarah went to her jewelry box, a small carved wooden box her mother had given her. She opened it, searched the bottom, and took out something wrapped in a silk scarf. It was another crystal, Himalayan pink salt, carved exactly like the one I had, in the shape of a teardrop. "The gray cushion I bought appeared last night on my cushion," he said, his voice a whisper of wonder. "When I touched it, I felt a warmth. And the note said, 'Forgiveness is a cushion for the soul. Ask for it from the man who forced you to lie.'" The message was for Sarah, from 40 years, but the final recipient was me. Jesus hadn't forced me to lie. I had chosen to lie. And in doing so, I had forced the person I loved most, my wife, to compromise her own integrity. I knelt. "I'm sorry, Sarah. You were right. He wanted me to go hug Emily, not lie. And I chose to lie for fear of losing my job of 20 years. She picked me up. You know the truth. Now, you have to do the one thing he can't do for you. I realized my next task. I had to go to the captain. I had to confess my lie about my whereabouts that night. I had to risk my job, my mortgage, everything I was. It was the only way to honor the truth Jesus had shown me. It was the only real price to pay for the peace that had entered my home. My daughter, Emily, from 10 years, I no longer cried over math. My wife was emotionally healed. But I was still broken, trapped in my lie. The next day, at even 30 in the morning, I went to the captain's office. I had my badge in my hand. The decision wasn't easy. It was a leap of faith. But I couldn't live another day being the fake cop who had covered up the biggest truth I'd ever known. I walked into the office and closed the door. The captain, a man of routine, was drinking his coffee. I placed my badge on the desk, right next to his cup. There I was. Detective David Miller, 41 years, standing in the captain's office, my badge on the desk. I had told the truth. The whole truth. The lie of my alibi, the hug to my daughter Emily, 10 years, the disappearance of Jesus, and the subsequent miracles that I had been secretly tracking. The captain, a man of the old guard, with 28 years old at the department, he just looked at me over his coffee cup. He expected dismissal, punishment, humiliation. The captain didn't yell. He didn't reprimand me. He didn't call security. Instead, he took a sip of his coffee, looked at me, and then looked at my badge. "Miller," he said, his voice strangely soft. "You've been a good cop for 20 years. Tough, honest, too methodical, sometimes." He paused for a bit too long for my liking. "And let me tell you something. If you had told me this story 3 months ago, I would have called the Department of Psychiatry before you could finish the word, Jesus." He stood up, went to his filing cabinet, and pulled out a dusty, unmarked manila envelope. He returned and placed it on the desk, pushing it toward me. "Sit down, David. You're not going to like this, but it's the reason I'm not firing you. You're not the first cop this has happened to. You're just the first one with the guts to tell the tale." I opened the envelope. Inside was a handful of unresolved incident reports, all from the last 5 years. These were minor cases, or cold cases, that had been filed away. A report of a warehouse fire that mysteriously stopped when an unknown person touched the wall. A hospital report of a comatose patient, a woman about 30 years, who woke up after an unregistered visitor left him a flower. A report of a failed robbery where the robber abandoned the money and left a small crystal pink salt in the scene. "Salt crystals, Captain?" I asked, my voice trembling as I pulled a grainy photo from the file. It was identical to the one Jesus left me in room 3. The captain nodded. "Yes, David. Same signature. The same teardrop crystal, as we call it. We've been tracking this unofficially for 5 years. We thought it was the signature of a cult, or maybe a very well-funded madman. But the incidents, they always end with an act of healing or truth. And the witnesses, if they exist at all, are always vague with their description. A man with a beard, plain clothes, all-knowing eyes. Why isn't this an official case?" I asked, feeling stupid for the obviousness of the answer. The captain took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Because it's crazy, David. It's the kind of thing that ruins careers. But," he paused, his voice becoming personal, "2 years ago, my oldest son, 25, overdosed. He was in the hospital, given no hope. A visitor showed up at his ICU room. There was no check-in, no pass, no security alert. No one saw him come in. And when the visitor left, my son woke up. And on the nightstand, there was a salt crystal." I felt a renewed respect for the captain. He, too, had been touched by the miracle, and he, too, had remained silent. The captain looked at my badge. "Miller, I'm not firing you. The official report will say you made a clerical error due to fatigue, but that the suspect has already been neutralized." He gave me back my badge. "But I want you to keep this file. I'm giving it to you unofficially. No one else in the department must know. I want you to find this man. For your family. For Chen. For the city. And, honestly, For me. I walked out of that office with my badge in my pocket, a lighter heart, and a stack of classified reports in my briefcase. It hadn't cost me my job. It had cost me my skepticism. I had gone from being a police officer arresting Jesus to a detective searching for him on his boss's orders. Fate had turned again. The truth had set me free. I found Chen, my partner in 27 years, in the briefing room. He stood up as soon as he saw me. He approached me, his eyes full of gratitude. "Boss," he said, his voice hoarse. "I talked to my dad. I told him the truth. I called the family support center. I don't know how that man knew, but we had to stop. I don't have to lie anymore." He gave me a quick, awkward hug. "Thank you, David." "Really?" I just nodded. I was no longer his boss at that moment. We were two men freed from secrets by the same master. I sat down at my desk, took out the file the captain had given me, and placed it next to Robert's CCTV tape. All the cases, all the salt crystals, all the healings. The pattern was evident. Jesus moved in concentric circles, touching lives ever closer to the original point of contact. The Central Park eye had been the initial contact. And now, the case map I held in my hands showed me the next point, a pattern that would lead me to the most unusual victim and, without a doubt, my most dangerous encounter yet. The file the captain had given me, the madness file, as we called it in my head, was full of unsolved cases that matched Jesus's pattern. Next on the list wasn't a person, but a place. The alley on 59th Street, a place that, according to the report, had been touched 3 years, the note said. Unsolved incident. Young overdose victim abandoned. Found alive, with a strange marking. 59th Street. It was the heart of downtown, a place where sunlight rarely touched the asphalt. Detective Miller, 41 years. I went there at 10 o'clock at night. The streetlights flickered, trash piled up on street corners, and the smell of damp and despair wafted through the air. I found the exact alley. It was flanked by 2 old abandoned warehouses, perfect for hiding. According to the report, it was 3 years. A young woman, often 19 years old, named Amy, had been abandoned there after a heroin overdose. She was clinically dead. And the next day, the police had found her, not dead, but alive and strangely lucid. I walked slowly down the alley. The report mentioned a strange detail. The young woman didn't remember anything from the night, but the paramedics had noticed an unusual mark. Not on her body, but near where she'd been found. I took out my police flashlight and shone it along the dirty brick walls. Dust, old graffiti, cobwebs. And then, I saw her. In the darkest corner, about head high, was something carved. It wasn't graffiti. It was a symbol carved into the stone with incredible precision, as if a laser had been used. It was a simple design, a circle with a line dividing it into 2 perfect halves, but with a heart in the center of the bottom. It was an image that evoked division and reconciliation. And in the small hollow carved, right at the base of the heart, there was a trace of something glittering. I picked it up with gloves. Himalayan pink salt, another teardrop crystal, ground to powder. It was the signature. Jesus had been there. The young woman, Amy, from 19 years old, had been touched, not directly, but through a trace of faith. The symbol in the alley was the turning point. If she hadn't done it, who had? I returned to the car and reviewed the rest of the report. An insignificant detail. The detective who closed the case mentioned that the young woman's father, a firefighter in 50 years, had become obsessed with the alley, visiting it every day for a month after his daughter recovered. The next morning at 8 in the morning, I went to the fire station. I asked for Amy's father, a man named Henry. A colleague. Like me, a public servant, but dealing with his own personal hell. Henry, a big man with a steely face, about 50 years, greeted me at the office. He looked tired, but not broken. I asked him about Amy and the incident from earlier. 3 years. He told me the story in a monotone. Amy's addiction, the overdose, finding her alive. And the alley, Henry. I asked him directly, "Why were you going there?" Henry looked down, adjusting his uniform. "I abandoned her, detective. That night, I followed her. She was with her friends, in that alley. She was doing drugs. And I saw her. And instead of helping her, I got angry. I yelled at her that I was fed up and left her there. I abandoned her to her fate. My 19-year-old daughter." His voice broke. "And then, What happened in the alley? I asked him, showing him the photo of the carved symbol. Henry looked at me, his eyes full of wonder. I did. When we found her alive, I came back. I was desperate to understand. I saw that symbol on the wall, blurry, and I stood there and I prayed. I prayed for forgiveness. I asked God not to punish my daughter for my own cruelty. And just then, I felt the warmth. And I heard a voice. Not loud, not heavenly, but calm. It said, "It's done. She's safe. Forgiveness is on the wall." Henry looked at me. I didn't carve it, detective. I just saw it. And I realized she was alive because I regretted it. Jesus hadn't healed young Amy. He had touched the soul of her father, Henry, forcing him to confront his guilt of abandonment. The healing touch wasn't the healing of an overdose, but the healing of relationship between a father and a daughter who had been broken up for years, and with that knowledge, my map was almost complete. Jesus didn't cure the symptom, he cured the cause. And the cause, almost always, was a lack of forgiveness. I had to find him. I needed to ask him, "Why me? Why did you choose me as your witness?" And he was going to reveal the last point on the map to me. The last report in my captain's file was from just a week. The incident was high profile, covered in the news. A serious accident on the Central Street and 7th Avenue during rush hour. 2 cars collided. The police report mentioned a miraculous intervention by a witness, but no one could identify him. This was the most public and chaotic event on Jesus's map. I reviewed the department's traffic footage. It was the 5:10 in the afternoon. The chaos was absolute. Ambulances, firefighters, my own people. The accident had involved 2 vehicles, an older sedan and an SUV. The sedan, driven by a young mother, about 25 years, had become trapped and was on fire. The mother was unconscious. I saw the images. Firefighters, including Amy's father, Henry, were battling the blaze. The car door was jammed. It had happened more than 5 minutes, and no one could reach the trapped woman. Time was running out. The fire was already licking at the ceiling. It was a scene of terror that rescuers gave up for lost in a 90% off the cases. And then, he appeared. Just walking down the sidewalk, amidst the confusion of sirens. It was Jesus, the same figure, in the woolen robe. In the video, the people around him moved away, not out of fear, but out of some kind of silent reverence. He approached the burning car. Jesus stopped in front of the stuck door. Instead of forcing it or trying to put out the fire, he did something incredibly simple. He put his hand on the burning car door. It wasn't a rough touch, it was a gesture of affection. And what happened next defied all the laws of physics I had learned in 41 years. The burning metal cooled immediately. The fire on that side of the car was extinguished. The video was clear. On the outside of the door, the burned and scorched paint turned into a layer of frost. On hot asphalt, on a hot day. November, where the temperature was 50 degrees Fahrenheit. A witness, a boy with a cell phone recording the accident, managed to capture the detail. The door was covered in ice, and right where Jesus's hand had landed, there was a perfect handprint. Henry, the firefighter I had met, saw the miracle. He saw the frost and the extinguished fire. Henry and his team immediately approached, forced open the door, now surprisingly easy to open, and pulled out the unconscious mother. She survived. But that wasn't the end of the scene. Just as Henry pulled the woman out, Jesus looked at him and signaled, not with his finger, but with his eyes, indicating that he should look at the passenger seat. On the passenger seat, a seat that had been nearly consumed by fire, there was an intact object. A small hand-carved wooden cross, covered in a thin layer of frost. Jesus hadn't stayed to be seen. He simply turned around and walked away from the intersection, vanishing into the crowd as if he'd never been there. The message was irrefutable. Jesus' touch not only healed the soul, it could also bend the laws of naturito, save physical life. I had used an act of public mayhem to touch Henry, Amy's father, a man I had met through my investigation. The circle was closing in on me, Detective Miller. I had arrested him in the park. Henry was the firefighter who had benefited from the latest intervention. Now I had the complete map. Since healing my guilt often years until the healing of my partner's family 27 years, going through the life of a young woman 19 years old. I had been the one who started the journey, the one who had put it in room 3, and now I was the only one with all the pieces. Jesus wasn't in my town for a sermon. He was there to create a cane of truth, and I was the unwitting messenger. It was time. I had to return to the source I had escaped from. Room 3. Not to search for him, but to wait for him. Because I felt, with every fiber of my being, that if there was anyone else I had to touch, it was me. It was the 11 o'clock at night. The police station was almost silent. I was wearing my civilian clothes, the same old jacket from the previous nights, but underneath it, I wasn't carrying a gun, just the heavy hand-carved wooden cross that Henry, the fireman, had pulled from the burning car. It was my amulet, my anchor. I felt like a man on a blind date with destiny. I, Detective Miller Offerty 1 years, I was looking for a fugitive, a miracle worker, and perhaps my own salvation. I walked into Interrogation Room Number 3. The same stainless steel table. The same hard plastic chairs. The same smell of bleach and desperation. I turned on the dim light. I laid the entire file on the table. Robert and Simon's report, Clara Jenkins's report, Amy and her father Henry's report, and my captain's note. In the center, I placed the 2 pink salt crystals, mine and Sarah's, my wife, and the wooden cross. It was my offering, proof of my journey. I sat down in the chair where Jesus had been. I was surprised at how uncomfortable it was. An hour passed. Then another. I looked at the clock on the wall. Midnight. My cop mind told me he was crazy, that he wouldn't come, that he'd left town after completing his strange mission of mercy. But my heart, my soul, knew I was the last dot on his map. He'd touched everyone close to me. Now it was the point of contact's turn. It was the 2:10 in the morning. I was about to give up, to accept that the truth was my only reward. I closed my eyes, resting my head in my hands. And then, I felt the warmth. Not a fiery warmth, but a comforting warmth that enveloped me, like a blanket. It smelled of wet earth, lavender, and, strangely, of that warm bread George had eaten in the park. I lifted my head. There he was, sitting in the chair across from me, the same chair where I had tried to interrogate him the night before. November. The door was closed. There was no noise. It was just there. Jesus, his patient eyes looked at me, and there was no reproach, only a deep, immense understanding. "Detective Miller," he said. It wasn't a resonant voice. It was a simple, human voice, but with undeniable authority. "I've been waiting for you, David." My throat was dry. I didn't ask why he'd left, or how he'd appeared. Logic no longer existed. There was only one question. The only question that mattered. Why me? Why did you choose me? I arrested you. I lied to you. I made fun of you in my head. My voice was a whisper. Jesus leaned over the table, the dim light reflecting off his long, dark hair. "I chose you, David, because you were the most stuck. A man of routine who had buried his heart beneath 20 years of uniforms and bureaucracy. Your love for your 10-year-old daughter, Emily, and your guilt over Michael were the cracks. I didn't come here to be arrested by a 41-year-old policeman. I came here to be arrested by a father who'd forgotten how to get home. And once you made that choice, a choice of love over fear, the way for others opened up." Jesus gently touched the file I had put together. "This is your new evidence, David. Evidence of the truth, not the law. Michael forgave you before he died. Your job was to forgive yourself. Now, you are free to be what you already were, a man of compassion. And your mission is simple. Don't look for me. Look for those who suffer, those who are stuck in guilt, and give them the truth you found." He stood up. Slowly, he extended his hand toward me. Not to cure an illness, but to seal a covenant. He placed his hand on my forehead. I felt a ray of warmth run through my body, not a pain, just a feeling of to be cleansed. I saw my life in a flash. My wife Sarah laughing, Emily graduating, Michael smiling. "The salt crystal," said. "It's to preserve the truth. And the cross is to remind you that life, even that of a police officer, is a sacrifice of love." I woke up. I was sitting in the chair. I had fallen asleep. The clock was striking 3 in the morning. The room was cold again. Jesus was gone. I stood up. The wooden cross and the 2 salt crystals were still there. But on the table, where I had laid out my life on paper, Only a piece of paper remained. A note, written in simple but powerful handwriting: "The interrogation is over. The verdict is pardon." I left room 3. It was 3:10 in the morning. The police station was a labyrinth of shadows. I felt light, as if the weight of my thoughts had been lifted from me. 41 years soft lies and skepticism. And just down the hall, sitting in a hard wooden chair, head bowed, was the young mansion. Detective Chen, my partner in crime at 27 years, was waiting for me. Chen raised his head. His eyes were no longer those of a frightened lamb. They were serene. He stood up. "Boss, I'm sorry. I didn't go home. I knew you had to come back here. I saw the light on. I was here all night." He looked at me, not asking if Jesus had returned. He knew he had. "Did you see anything?" I asked him. Chen nodded. "Yes. I saw you. You came in about 5 hours ago. I was watching the security cameras in the hallway." "But..." Chen hesitated, looking around. "But an hour ago, the camera in room 3 went dark. There was a power surge. And then, the smell of incense. When the camera came back on, at 1:30 a.m., you were asleep in the chair." He paused, and his voice grew louder. "But you weren't alone. For a moment, I saw a shadow of light beside you. And, boss, the door to the living room was locked. I locked it to protect you." I told Chen about the captain's file. I told him about Robert, Simon, and the mother in the car accident. I told him about the truth that Jesus had left, not just for me, but for the entire city. And in that moment, I realized my new job. My badge was no longer a symbol of the law, but a permission to seek the truth that heals. "Chen," I told him, "there is a greater truth than what we write in the reports." I placed the wooden cross in Chen's hands. "This is a reminder," I told him. "The cross of the burning man. The truth is our only weapon now." Chen held the cross and looked at it reverently. We understood that our work on the force wasn't over. It had just changed. We would still be police officers, but from now on, we would seek justice. Root cause of despair, not just the symptom of crime. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me. She didn't say anything. She just hugged me. A long hug, one of total understanding. Emily, from 10 years, came out of his room, rubbing his eyes. He asked me why the cross hanging from my rearview mirror shone so brightly. I told him it was a gift from a man who had taught us the value of a hug. That morning, I got up and went to pay the March mortgage, certain that everything would turn out well. And it did. The captain and I kept the file secret. I remained Detective Miller. But my methods changed. When I saw a tampering report, I no longer looked for a culprit. I looked for root of despair. I helped families find forgiveness. I used Robert's story to convince people that it's never too late to start. My work became an act of service, not an obligation. And the salt crystal, the one Jesus had left me, was stored in my locker. The evidence of faith. And most interestingly, from that night on, the salt crystal incidents ceased in the city. Jesus' work was over. His mission to touch people and free me from my guilt was complete. He didn't come to stay. He came to fix, and he left me, the skeptical policeman, in charge of maintaining the truth. Life is like that, you know? You think you've got it all figured out, that you're in control. And then, a man claiming to be Jesus forces you to choose between a comfortable lie and a liberating truth. I learned that faith isn't the opposite of skepticism, but the courage to act despite doubt, and that the greatest miracle is not walking on water, but that a broken man, like me, 41 years, can finally forgive himself. And this is my story, the journey that took me from arresting a prophet to living my own truth. A story of everyday encounters, of miracles in the alley, and of peace found in a small room 3. But the question now is, what would you do? What truth is waiting for you? If this story moved you as much as it moved me, please leave a comment. Tell us what secret or guilt you'd like to release. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next video. Like this video if you believe the truth is the greatest miracle of all. See you in the next video. May Jesus be with you.